How often do you meet your parents' expectations? Or do you do things your own way, not listening to anyone? What are you willing to do to live a life free from parental orders? Some people endure and obey without question to avoid disappointment, while others are stubborn. Today's case, we are going to discuss, falls into the latter category, although it has a much more tragic outcome. Please subscribe to my channel, and if you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It helps promote my videos on YouTube. Hong Kong is a very unique city. No city in the world can be called safe. But for some reason, it is here in Hong Kong that the most gruesome stories occur. The atmosphere of murder in Asian countries is much more sinister. Hong Kong has a population of about 7.5 million people. A large number of tourists also visit here every year. There is a lot to see here. The Disneyland theme park, the Temple Street night market, the crescent-shaped beach, and so on. It's warm and fun here, but not every tourist visiting this city realizes that it holds special secrets of very scary and dangerous people. And it's better not to know about their fantasies at all. Anyway, it was here in Hong Kong, on June 7, 1983, that Henry Chow Hoi Leung was born, the son of Gloria Chow Wing Ki and Moon Sui Yi. Little is known about the parents. Gloria and Moon were an ordinary married couple who had been together for many years. They also had an older son, Hoi Yin, and the four of them lived together in the Sai Ying Pun district. But let's get back to Henry, the younger son of the couple, who is the focus of today's story. His childhood was not particularly happy, you could say. It was unremarkable. However, it is worth noting that the parents tried to support their son's interests as best they could. They even paid for his piano lessons and education, but it turned out that none of the hobbies ended in success. Henry would quit everything halfway and had no idea what he was truly passionate about. Some even said that the boy lived in his own world from an early age. He was withdrawn, quiet, and closed off. For this reason, when school started, Henry remained a loner, without friends, and also did poorly in his studies. This disappointed his parents. They had high hopes for him, and when his school performance became abysmal, his parents decided to intervene. They sent Henry to Canberra, Australia, for actuarial mathematics courses. But even this did not help him improve his knowledge or make friends. On the contrary, he was bullied, mocked, and discriminated against. Eventually, the mental stress caused by such societal treatment, along with complete academic failure, forced Henry to drop out of school in 2003. Of course, he did not inform his parents about this decision. Upon returning to Hong Kong, he lied to his parents, telling them he had successfully graduated. It didn't take long for his parents to discover the truth. Gloria and Moon were incredibly disappointed and upset with their son. They tried to force Henry to enroll in any other educational institution, but it was all in vain. Their attempts and pressure were unsuccessful, and Henry withdrew even further into himself. Now he vented all his negativity in online games, where, according to rumors, it was the only place he was respected. Henry had friends there with whom he often discussed various topics. Once, he confessed that he considered himself a psychopath, which is why his avatar on most social networks was a picture of Adolf Hitler. By the way, school was not the only area where Henry failed. He also struggled in relationships with girls. Any relationship he had ended in failure because the young man did not feel compassion or care. One such story occurred when one of his girlfriends became pregnant, and upon learning about it, Henry advised her to get rid of the baby. However, the girl refused and chose to keep the child. Instead of helping her raise the baby, Henry broke all ties with her and decided never to appear in her life again. But did this make him feel any better? By nature, Henry was a true failure. Even in work, he was unlucky. He couldn't hold a job for more than a couple of months. He was either fired or he quit. The only job he enjoyed was playing the piano at events, banquets, weddings, and so on. However, Henry did not want his parents to know about this. It was at one such gig in 2007 that Henry met someone who would later play a significant role in this case. This was a 35-year-old Macau native, Angus Tse Chin. Angus was the complete opposite of Henry. Friends described him as kind and gentle-hearted. His openness and love for people manifested in his trust. He could be easily manipulated. Angus would do anything for good food and friendship, but it didn't harm him. He probably didn't even realize that many people took advantage of him because his IQ was only 84. He was also unlucky in romantic relationships. His first girlfriend died in an accident, and his first wife confessed on their wedding night that she had used him only to obtain Hong Kong citizenship. She was already married to someone else. After these failed relationships, Angus decided to move to New Zealand, where he fell in love with a new woman. However, she also treated him cruelly, leaving him to fend for himself and even swindling all his money. Ultimately, in 2010, Angus returned to Hong Kong with a broken heart. His emotional turmoil affected his mind, and unfortunately, in the following years, Angus made several attempts to take his own life. But as you might have guessed, all these attempts were not only unsuccessful, but also left their mark. The last time, Angus swallowed mercury, which further deteriorated his mental health, and he was never the same again. Such a state can be destructive for someone who already feels helpless and vulnerable. In such cases, psychiatrists prescribe antidepressants and therapy, but many resort to simpler methods like alcohol and drugs. During this period, Angus was unlucky, and he clung to anything or anyone that brought him happiness. The problem was that people by nature can be selfish, and not everyone should be trusted. Unfortunately for Angus, fate brought him together with Henry Chow. By the end of 2012, Henry had accumulated a lot of debt. He continued to procrastinate and parasitize. He spent a lot of money on failed investments, didn't work, and lived lavishly. Despite having no income, he continued to eat well and buy expensive clothes. He even managed to mock and look down on those with below-average incomes, although he lived off his parents' money, who supported him only out of love for their son. At some point, his parents had enough. Gloria and Moon spent a long time urging Henry to find a job and start living independently. However, Henry disagreed with them. He was content with his life, leading to deteriorating relations and increasing tension between him and his parents. In 2013, the family frequently argued, and there were obvious reasons for this. Henry still wasn't working, living off his parents, and he even suggested they sell the apartment and split the money 3 ways, between him, his brother, and their parents. Naturally, they were shocked by this suggestion, as they were nearing retirement and had their own plans for that period of their lives. So Gloria and Moon finally said no to their son and asked him to move out and find a job. For Henry, this meant the end of the parasitic lifestyle he had become so accustomed to over the years. After an argument, he eventually left home and cut off all contact with his family. It's unknown where he was during those weeks, but it is clear what he was thinking about. Henry was devising a cunning plan that would shock and horrify all of Hong Kong. The young man never managed to understand his parents. In his opinion, he had every right to their property and blamed them for all his life's failures. Henry decided that after all these arguments, the emotional tension was too high, and therefore Gloria and Moon had to die. He believed that only their death could free him from all his failures and help him start anew. During this time, he had already manipulated his newfound friend Angus into helping him carry out this horrific plan. Henry confided his plan to Angus and convinced him to help bring this horror to reality. Given Angus's kind-heartedness and suggestibility, this wasn't difficult. But just in case, Henry threatened to kill Angus's mother if he refused. For several months, Henry prepared. He acquired nearly a dozen knives, a microwave oven, a kitchen stove, and 2 refrigerators. Henry chose a date, March 1st, and what he had planned for his parents that day was beyond comprehension. On March 7th, 6 days after carrying out his sinister plan, Henry's older brother began to worry. He hadn't heard from their parents for almost a week, which was highly unusual. Henry reassured his brother, saying that perhaps Gloria and Moon had gone on an unplanned trip to China. But Hoi Yin was quite skeptical of this suggestion. The situation seemed too strange, so he decided to contact the police. When authorities began their investigation, they confirmed that Gloria and Moon hadn't left the city, raising even more questions. something was definitely wrong. As a result, the brothers created social media chats regarding the search for their missing parents. Henry and Hoi Yin begged for any information about their whereabouts. They were last seen on March 1st, near Langham Place in Mongkok. Henry even approached Apple Daily with a public plea for help. However, none of their attempts to find their parents on their own were successful. All that was left was to wait for the horrifying details of Gloria and Moon's mysterious disappearance to come to light. On the morning of March 15, 2013, Hong Kong police were dispatched to a family home in the suburbs. Officers were instructed to arrest a 20-year-old man who had made a chilling confession in a WhatsApp group chat. The confession described the actions of a person who had just killed his own parents, and his friend had helped him commit this terrible crime. You've already guessed who it was: Henry Chow and Angus Tse. As for the confession, it was made directly by Henry. So, the police arrived at the house on Phuoc Tsui Street, Tai Kok Tsui, belonging to Angus Tse. Officers entered and immediately realized something terrible had happened. The floors and walls were stained with blood. Various saws and 7 knives were scattered throughout the house. In the corner were garbage bags filled with cement and sand. However, all these findings were nothing compared to what they would find next. Inside the microwave, inspectors found a thick layer of yellow fat. The whole place reeked of cooked meat. When the officers opened one of the garbage bags, they understood what had happened. Inside the bag were severed human limbs. Throughout the apartment, more than 600 foam lunchboxes were found, containing salted and boiled meat of Gloria and Moon. When examining both refrigerators, the police discovered pots containing the victims' heads, which had been previously steamed. Under Angus's mattress, a notebook was found, where he and Henry had detailed their plan for disposing of the bodies and a list of necessary items. One of the notes also mentioned that the bones should be sprinkled with sand and cement before being disposed of in the sea. All these discoveries certainly made the police shudder, but what shocked them the most was something else. Several body parts were missing from the apartment, leading to the conclusion that the killers had probably cooked and eaten them. Henry and Angus were held in custody until the trial, which was scheduled for August 2014. Because the case itself was so repulsive, 2 jurors refused to participate in the trial, causing the proceedings to be postponed until February 2015. During the trial, psychologists tried to find an explanation for such an outburst of aggression. They noted that a month before the murders, Henry repeatedly listened to recordings of Verluflami to feel better. One psychologist remarked that this music had a significant impact on the young man, causing negative images in his mind. Henry also believed that without his parents' care and home, his life would inevitably turn into hell, which he could not allow. Psychologists also noted that Henry suffered from bipolar disorder and OCD, which explained this outburst of aggression more than the genre of music he listened to. However, after a second psychological examination, both reasons were ruled out, and instead, specialists concluded that Henry was a narcissist with a personality disorder. The young man admitted that if they had gotten away with it, he and Angus would have fled to China, where they would continue their career as killers. They planned to attack prostitutes or women walking by and then kill them. At least this was according to Henry. In reality, both men had 2 completely different versions of the events when it came to the murder of Gloria and Moon. Henry never took full responsibility for his actions, instead trying to shift part of the blame onto Angus. He claimed that after luring his parents to the apartment, Angus slit Moon's throat while Henry stabbed his mother in the back of the head. Henry also claimed that during the murders, he injured his leg and had to go to the hospital to get stitches. As a result, Angus was left alone with the bodies. When Henry returned to the apartment, he allegedly saw that Angus had dismembered the bodies by himself. To top it all off, he even tried to frame his friend by placing Angus's notebook under the bed. However, handwriting analysis revealed that Henry was the author. Angus's story greatly differed from his friend's version. The young man claimed that Henry had killed his parents several days before he came home. Angus was not in the apartment until March 4th, 3 days after the murders. When he entered the apartment, Henry threatened to kill his mother, and it was for this reason that he had to agree to dispose of the bodies. According to Angus, he did not take part in the actual killing of Gloria and Moon. Of course, both young men tried to place the blame on each other, but it was proven that the crime had been meticulously planned by both murderers. In January and February, their preparations were in full swing, and on March 1st, they committed the murder as planned. On March 20th, 2015, the verdict was finally delivered. Henry Chow was found guilty of the double murder of his parents, while Angus Tse was found not guilty of the murders. Both men were separately found guilty of preventing the lawful burial of the bodies and received different sentences for this. Henry Chow was sentenced to life imprisonment, plus an additional 9 years and 4 months. Angus Tse was given only 1 year in prison. However, since he had already served 2 years in jail awaiting trial, he was released immediately after the case was closed. You might ask why Angus received almost no punishment at all. In fact, the lawyers were able to prove his non-involvement in the murders, and Angus Tse was merely under pressure from his friend. As for Henry, the judge's concluding remarks stated, "People may wonder why you did this. The fact that there is no obvious answer to this question makes you so dangerous that, in my opinion, it is entirely fair. There was no valid reason to kill your own mother and father. Henry is a selfish monster to the core, and now he must pay for his actions for the rest of his life." Gloria and Moon wanted nothing more than to see their son grow up to be a successful and happy person. But instead, they had to watch Henry make one wrong decision after another, despite all their guidance and advice. So it is entirely understandable why they were disappointed. Instead of being grateful to his parents for everything they did for him, he merely used them. And when they stopped pitying him, he decided to get rid of them. The most pitiful figure in this whole story is Henry's brother, who lost his parents knowing that it was his own brother who took them away. To this day, Henry Chow remains in a Hong Kong prison. He will never be released and will never harm anyone again. Now let's move on to the next story. South Korea is a country where street crime and violent crimes are almost non-existent. Car thefts are extremely rare. There are 2.6 murders per 100,000 people annually, more than twice as low as in the United States. South Korea ranks first in the world for the number of plastic surgeries and the speed of internet connections. While it's uncommon to take vacations here, you can borrow a book for free from a library car in the subway and read it on your way to work. This is the fascinating setting where today's story takes place. South Korea is a country located on the Korean Peninsula, bordered by the Yellow Sea, the Sea of Japan, and the East China Sea. It's a place where ancient traditions uniquely blend with modern trends. With a population of around 51 million, the Republic is an economically developed nation with a high per capita income. It's the world's largest shipbuilder, and there is a huge demand for Korean products, especially cars, in China. It is one of the most technologically advanced countries globally. Korean architecture has a rich history, with the oldest and most notable monument being the Gyeongbokgung Palace in Seoul, also known as the Palace of Shining Happiness, built in 1394. Visitors to the country can enjoy beautiful mountain landscapes and the extensive beaches along the Korean peninsula's coastline. South Korean men top the global ranking for skincare product consumption per capita, far ahead of Denmark in second place. South Korea also leads in the number of plastic surgeries per capita, surpassing Brazil, Thailand, and the United States. The country is also known for its unique practice of crime reenactment. Suspects in serious crimes like murder or rape are brought to the crime scene where, in front of large crowds and live broadcast journalists, they reenact the events. Often, these events see the suspects kneeling and begging for forgiveness from the victims' families and the public. South Korea is also the birthplace of esports, with games like StarCraft enjoying immense popularity. Official estimates suggest that 1 in 10 South Koreans owns a copy of this game. It is in one of the many computer clubs ubiquitous in this country that this dreadful story begins. In one of the computer clubs in Cheonggyecheon, a district in Seoul, a young woman was playing one of her favorite games. Due to the specifics of South Korea's judicial system, we do not know her real name. The names of victims are rarely, if ever, disclosed publicly. Neither are there photos nor any personal details. For convenience, we will call her Jane. Jane was 25 years old and had been working at the computer club for a couple of years. The club operated 24/7, and Jane often stayed after her shift to play games with friends. Jane had many friends among the regulars of the club. During Christmas, Jane's group was playing one of the most popular games in Korea, League of Legends. Jane knew almost everyone in her group, but there were a few new faces, including a young man named Kim Tae-hyun. Kim was 25 years old, born in 1996, making him a year younger than Jane. Kim didn't stand out much among his peers. He worked in the same field as Jane, at another computer club, and was also a fan of esports. At first, Kim didn't show much interest in Jane, but over time, things changed. During one of their late-night gaming sessions at the club, Kim confessed his romantic feelings to Jane. Unfortunately for Kim, Jane did not feel the same way and honestly told him so. This rejection deeply upset Kim, leading to a quarrel between the two. It was nothing significant, just a moment where hurt and disappointment got the better of him. Several months passed. The group continued to meet frequently at the computer club, but Kim had changed. It seemed that Jane's rejection had hit him hard. Once close friends, Kim and Jane now hardly spoke, even avoiding conversations within the group. However, as time went on, it became clear that Kim was not ready to give up on his connection with Jane. He began bombarding her with messages and trying to find opportunities to talk to her or just be around her. He's been harassing her relentlessly, forcing Jane to block Kim everywhere she can. This includes removing him from her friends list in League of Legends, where they had been longtime teammates. You'd think that with time, his obsession would fade, and he'd move on with his life after the painful rejection. Normally, that's what happens, but unfortunately, not with Kim Tae-hyun. His condition, and the unhealthy emotional bond he feels towards Jane, only worsened over time. Kim started calling her using public payphones, leaving lengthy voicemails on her answering machine. He also knew the internet cafe where Jane worked and spent her time, often waiting for her after work. Jane was forced to change her phone number and quit her job due to his relentless stalking. Even after being blocked on all her social media accounts, Kim created fake profiles to track her movements. Eventually, he found out Jane's new number, and the flood of messages and calls started again. Kim was an ordinary Korean guy. He dropped out of college at 16 to start working. After a brief stint at a company specializing in computer repairs, he was drafted into the army where he served for 2 years. Upon returning, he was rehired by his old computer repair firm. The owner, who had a friendly relationship with Kim, welcomed him back without hesitation. Kim balanced his job at the company with various side gigs. At some point, the owner noticed money missing from the register. Reviewing the surveillance footage revealed that Kim was the culprit. He was fired, but no criminal charges were pressed, likely due to the owner's previous friendship with him. However, word of his misconduct spread among his gaming buddies, and many of them cut ties with him. Following this incident, Kim stopped visiting the computer club, where he used to play, and became a loner. Kim's life took a downward spiral. In the summer of 2019, he was fined $1,500 by the police for allegedly harassing a woman in a public restroom. Jane also reported his stalking behavior to the police, submitting the voicemail recordings Kim had been leaving her for the past 6 months. As a result, Kim received another fine of $2,000 and a restraining order preventing him from approaching Jane. During this period, Kim's mental state seemed to deteriorate. Within a short time, he had received 3 fines, been rejected by both his girlfriend and friends, faced work issues, and was in severe financial distress. These factors, combined with his obsession with Jane, likely eroded his psyche over time. All the accumulated negativity eventually had to find an outlet, and it did. Kim was not ready to give up on Jane. He created a new fake account in League of Legends and added her as a friend under an alias. Jane fell for the ruse, and they played together for a long time. Meanwhile, Kim meticulously monitored her social media activity, trying to figure out her daily schedule, work hours, rest times, and most importantly, where she lived. One day, Kim's luck turned. Jane posted a photo of a recently delivered package on social media. In the background of one of the boxes, the delivery address was clearly visible. It was Jane's address. Now, Kim knew where she lived, her approximate schedule, when she was at work, when she was at home, and when she visited the club. On March 25, 2021, Kim packed his white backpack with tape, gloves, several knives, and a spare set of clothes. It was later discovered that his search history that morning included queries like how to kill someone quickly and where is Mapo Bridge, a notorious suicide spot in South Korea. Kim put on a black tracksuit and headed to Jane's address. At 5:15 p.m., street surveillance cameras spotted Kim walking towards the computer club where he believed Jane was spending her time. It's unclear why he chose this particular club, traveling about 20 kilometers across the city to get there. He probably deduced from her social media activity that this was where she spent her time. Kim searched all the rooms in the club, but not finding Jane, he left. At 5:30 p.m., Kim was again caught on surveillance cameras, appearing in the smoking area near the computer club and inspecting the surrounding utility area, still not finding what he was looking for. 10 minutes later, Kim left the area and headed to Jane's address, which he had found on social media. He got past the security of the residential complex by pretending to be a delivery courier. Kim went up to the right floor and knocked on the door. A woman's voice responded, asking him to leave the package at the door. Kim placed the package down and pretended to leave, stepping out of view of the peephole. 7 minutes later, the door cracked open. Kim quickly jumped forward, wedging his foot in the door. Standing there was not Jane, but her 22-year-old younger sister. Kim forcibly pushed the girl inside and shut the door, killing her with several knife wounds. Kim spent the entire day in the apartment with her body, waiting for Jane to return. At 10:30 p.m., he heard the front door open. It was Jane's mother, returning from work. As she entered the apartment, Kim attacked her, killing her the same way he had killed the younger sister. 2 hours later, after finishing her shift at the computer club, Jane came home. She met the same fate as her mother and sister. After the triple murder, Kim stayed in the victim's apartment. He lived there among the bodies, eating their food and drinking the alcohol he found in the fridge. Kim also inflicted wounds on himself with the knife, though none were life-threatening. After Jane didn't show up for work for some time, her friends grew increasingly worried and decided to check on her. When no one answered the door, they reported her missing to the police. 3 days later, with a search warrant in hand, the police broke into Jane's apartment. Kim was still there, beside the bodies. He had inflicted numerous superficial cuts and stab wounds on himself, which required hospitalization but were not life-threatening. A week later, Kim was discharged from the hospital and immediately taken into custody. During a search of Kim's apartment, police found the place in utter disarray, with all the furniture broken and the rooms in chaos. They discovered his passport discarded in the trash, suggesting he hadn't tried to hide it, merely throwing it away. After his confession, Kim underwent a crime reenactment procedure, which I mentioned at the beginning of this report. He publicly apologized to the victims' relatives, kneeling and expressing that his heart ached for the victims and that he felt extremely guilty for what he had done. In his public statement after his arrest, Kim first apologized not to his victims, but to the reporters gathered outside the police station in northern Seoul. "I don't think I can answer all of your questions," he said. "I sincerely ask for your understanding. I am very sorry," Kim stated. When asked if he wanted to say anything to the victims' families, he turned to the officer holding his hand and asked, "Could you let go for a second?" Then he dropped to his knees and said, "I feel an enormous guilt for breathing and even living. I would like to apologize for all the damage I have caused to everyone, including the victims' families. A woman in the crowd repeatedly shouted, "Execute Kim Tae-han, the murderer." To all other questions, he simply repeated, "I am sorry," including when asked why he killed the women. Briefly, and at a reporter's request, he removed his mask before being escorted into the police car that was to take him to the Seoul Northern District Prosecutor's office. Kim was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was found guilty of multiple crimes: murder, theft, harassment, breaking and entering, and unlawful use of communication networks. The prosecution had sought the death penalty for Kim in their closing arguments, stating that there was no other punishment suitable for this man other than the death penalty. They argued that Kim had meticulously planned his ruthless murders and showed utter disregard for human life. Kim's apologies were perceived as a strategy to mitigate his sentence, as the police stated that Kim had planned the crime for at least a week. He had searched the internet for ways to kill and tried to find out when his victim would be home. After the verdict, the victim's family members said they would appeal to the prosecution to challenge the court's decision, believing that Kim deserved the death penalty for his crimes. They stated that life imprisonment was too lenient for the man who had destroyed a happy family. However, the court rejected the death penalty, noting that Kim had confessed to most of his crimes and had no prior serious criminal record. The defendant also submitted a statement expressing deep regret for his actions, though the court noted there was no certainty about the sincerity of this remorse. This type of behavior is known as stalking. Stalking involves unwanted obsessive attention towards someone, leading to the victim fearing for their safety. A stalker may follow you, make incessant phone calls, and send endless messages on social media. Romantic messages often escalate into threats and physical harm, even leading to beatings and murder. In Korea, stalking was previously treated as a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of up to 100,000 won, or up to 29 days in jail. The National Police Agency reported 5,000 stalking complaints in 2020 across Korea, with nearly 90% of these cases being resolved on the spot without further police action. Responding to public calls for harsher penalties, in March 2021, the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea passed a new law. Starting from October 21st, stalkers could face up to 3 years in prison, or a fine of up to 30 million won. In more severe cases, the penalties could increase to a maximum of 5 years in prison and a fine of up to 50 million won. Stalking is a global issue, often affecting celebrities. In 2017, British actress Keira Knightley encountered a peculiar stalker. Mark Revell, a 50-year-old man, was obsessed not only with the actress but also with cats. He sent Keira cat-themed postcards and once mailed a USB drive with a song titled Fuzzy Kitty Waltz, performed by him, accompanied by a note asking her to evaluate his work. Later, he trespassed onto her property and meowed through her mail slot. Keira's husband chased the man away, after which Revell tweeted, "If Whiten plays the devil, I must play the public punisher, right?" and posted a nude photo of Keira Knightley. Revell was arrested in 2016. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had a history of sending threatening letters to various people. Once, he even broke into the house of a nurse he knew, completely naked. He was sentenced to compulsory treatment, fined, and given 2 months in jail, along with a restraining order against approaching the actress. Another incident occurred in 2005 with American opera singer Leandra Ram. Colin Leung, a 36-year-old man, saw her performance on TV and contacted her, posing as an opera manager. Leandra initially communicated with him, believing his story. She stopped responding when he began acting strangely, but by then, the stalker had all her contact information. He started sending her photos of weapons and threatening notes. Despite her pleas, neither the FBI nor the police were willing to help. It was only after a long time that private detective Ray Faradella managed to secure a criminal case against the stalker. It was discovered that Leung had also sent threatening letters to 2 other musicians, pianist Ilona Krasny and Ukrainian violinist Veronika Sakhno. He was sentenced to a $5,000 fine and 3 years in prison. After his release in 2019, he resumed his old behavior. Now let's turn our attention to the next case. On the morning of June 16, 2005, a 27-year-old cleaner named Murugan Kanyapan made a horrifying discovery along the banks of the Kallang River. He stumbled upon a soggy, brown cardboard box sealed with tape. Intending to dispose of it, Murugan approached the box, but it was too damaged by the water. When he lifted it, the box fell apart, revealing a green package inside. To his horror, the package contained a neatly severed part of a woman's body, cut at the pelvis and knee joints. Shocked by the freshness of the remains, which made it seem as if the woman had hardly died, Murugan immediately contacted the police to report the gruesome find. According to him, there was no blood or odor, and the exposed knee bone appeared white. The police combed the river's surroundings within a 2-kilometer radius, searching for other body parts and possible clues about what had happened. Soon, about 200 meters from the initial discovery site, they found a red and white printer box containing the upper part of a woman's torso, with her arms and hands amputated. This part of the body was wrapped in a plastic bag, and several pages torn from old issues of a local Chinese newspaper. Later, both body parts were examined and found to belong to the same individual. Forensic experts, having obtained samples, were able to lift fingerprints, and after checking the database, the police found a match. The fingerprints belonged to 22-year-old Liu Hongmei. Born on September 14, 1982 in Changchun, China, Liu Hongmei was the third of 4 siblings, born into a modest family and always known for her good character. However, the rest of her information remains an absolute mystery. In 2003, after completing her studies, Liu moved to Singapore, following in the footsteps of one of her sisters, Hong Wei, who had moved earlier and was engaged to a Singaporean. Liu aimed to find a good job that would help improve her living conditions. Indeed, she managed to secure a position at Agar Systems Singapore as a production operator. Eager for self-improvement and to stabilize her financial situation, she enrolled in evening English classes, as she planned to study at a local polytechnic university and earn a degree in tourism. At the company, Liu was known as a friendly and cheerful colleague who got along well with others. However, Liu was promoted more quickly than usual, which raised suspicions and some discontent among her colleagues. The short interval between her first position and her promotion caused concern, which intensified when she was promoted a second time. The closeness between Liu, who was not yet 25, and her supervisor, Leong Siu Chor, a man around 50 years old, was obvious to everyone. Leong was born on April 19, 1955. He had a twin brother with whom he grew up and lived in Singapore. Leong received a higher education and completed national service. He then joined the company Singtel and worked there for 20 years, from 1976 to 1996. His close ones were unaware that Liu was Leong's mistress, as she was half his age and even younger than some of his children. Their affair began when she was first assigned to work under his supervision. Initially, they behaved quite reservedly, but eventually it seemed they could no longer hide their relationship. It got to the point where they were seen kissing and embracing in front of other company employees. On September 14, 2004, they were reported to the management for kissing, and both Liu and Leong received a severe reprimand from company executives for inappropriate behavior at the workplace. Despite the reprimand, the couple continued their illicit relationship. On June 15, 2005, Liu's colleagues reported her missing. They were concerned because it was unusual for her not to show up for work. On June 18, 2005, the police went to Liu's workplace, where they interviewed her colleagues who informed the investigators about the woman's affair with her boss, who was twice her age. The police decided to interrogate Leong. At that time, the investigators did not tell him that Liu's body had been found. However, Inspector Roy Lim noticed that Leong was behaving suspiciously. He was defensive, denied any relationship with Liu, and his hands were trembling. The inspector even noticed small cuts on the man's fingers. Consequently, Leong was taken to the police station for further interrogation. 9 hours after being detained, Leong confessed to the police that he had killed Liu, but claimed that it was done with her consent as part of a lover's pact to die together. However, he admitted he lacked the courage to follow through on his part of the pact. He also confessed that he had been in a romantic relationship with Liu for a year. The forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy on the girl's body parts, Dr. Teo Eng Sui, was unable to determine the cause of death because there were no defensive wounds found on the victim's body. Moreover, the head, shins, and feet were missing, which also complicated the determination of the cause of death. Dr. Teo also confirmed that there was no sexual violence, as no DNA was found in the swabs taken from the genital areas. Just 3 days after Liu's body parts were found, 50-year-old Liang was charged with her murder. Under Singaporean law, if found guilty, he would face the death penalty. Upon hearing of his arrest, Liang's wife and eldest daughter, who were vacationing in Thailand, hurried back to Singapore to join his 2 younger children at the hearing where the charges were formally presented. Subsequently, the family hired Subhas Anandan, a leading criminal lawyer in Singapore, to represent Liang in the trial. Meanwhile, Liang was under continuous investigation. In his initial statements, he denied the murder charges, claiming that Liu had come to his home on the morning of June 15, 2005, and asked if he could go back to China with her to start over. He responded that he could not do this because he still loved his wife and 3 adult children. Liang recounted that Liu, desperate about their relationship, suggested that they die together. He also claimed that, to demonstrate her sincerity, she willingly allowed him to strangle her first, and then himself. Liang agreed, as he was also overwhelmed by the hopeless future of their relationship. He insisted that he loved her, was tormented by her death, and maintained that he had not intended to kill her. Liang stated that he strangled Liu with a towel until she died. Initially, he intended to die in the same manner, but upon seeing her face next to him, he lost his nerve and could not proceed. In a panic, the man decided to hide the body, knowing one of his daughters was due to return home at 6 p.m., and thus he needed to act quickly. He then told the inspector that he used a butcher's knife and a rubber mallet to cut the body into 7 parts and separate the bones. He packed the remains in plastic bags, which he distributed across 5 separate boxes. After completing the gruesome task, Liang said he cleaned the bathroom and tidied up. He then took his son's bicycle to dispose of the legs, shoes, and victim's belongings. He hurried back home afterward to dispose of the remaining parts in the Kallang River and other locations. Having rid himself of all evidence, Liang returned home at 5 o'clock in the evening to clean the butcher's knife and prepared to go to his usual night shift at 7 o'clock. However, subsequent police investigation revealed a detail that seemed inconsistent with Liang's claim of a mutual suicide pact. Investigators discovered that 2 days before her death, Liu had reported to the police the theft of her bank card and unauthorized withdrawals from her accounts at various locations across Singapore, totaling about $2,000. Police checked surveillance camera footage from the ATMs where the money was withdrawn. In all the footage, a thin man wearing a cap and a hooded sweatshirt was captured, and investigators suspected that it was Liang. They then speculated that the motive for Liu's murder might be related to the theft of her money. At one point, the police investigation momentarily became complicated because it turned out that Liang had an identical twin brother also living in Singapore. Dr. Teo, the forensic pathologist, stated that if identical twins were involved in the murder case, it would be difficult to determine who the real murderer was, since they share the same DNA. The inspector also speculated that Liang might be covering for his brother, who could have been the one who killed Liu and stole her bank cards. Fortunately, this confusion was soon resolved, as the twin brother had an irrefutable alibi for the day of the crime. Therefore, the person seen withdrawing money at the ATM could not have been anyone other than Liang. Upon learning of the theft, the accused claimed that it was a joke between him and Liu, and he asserted that he had returned the money to her. However, police could not find any evidence in the homes of Liang and Liu to support his claim. Additionally, the police discovered that Liu was studying and eagerly wanted to be the bridesmaid at her sister's wedding. Furthermore, Liu was thriving at her work and had recently approached a dating agency in search of a potential boyfriend, aware that her relationship with Liang would not progress and was doomed to end poorly. The optimistic demeanor of the girl in the last days of her life ultimately shattered Liang's argument about a supposed lover's pact to die together. Even after the man's arrest, officers continued to search for Liu's remains. A special police task force consisting of 30 people combed the shores and bushes around the Kallang River. The search also extended to the Singapore River. Eventually, the police went to the incineration plant in Tuas to find the remaining body parts, as they were informed that all waste from the Singapore River is sent to this incineration plant. After 10 hours, the police discovered a decomposed head wrapped in newspaper and placed in a yellow bag, as well as severed legs. Although the head was too decomposed to be recognizable, Dr. Teo confirmed that it belonged to the victim. However, the severed feet were never found. On June 18, 2005, after being charged with murder, Leong was taken to his home where he had committed the crime. Many journalists rushed there to catch a glimpse of the murderer who had terrorized Singapore with his heinous crime. The media was replete with images of police officers exiting the apartment with evidence collected for the investigation. Among the items gathered were a partially damaged butcher knife, a rubber mallet, several Chinese newspapers with missing pages, plastic bags, part of the clothing Leong wore prior to his arrest, and the towel he allegedly used to strangle Liu. The forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy on the victim found several tiny metal fragments attached to the muscles of the left leg. Later, these metal fragments were matched to the butcher knife, which Leong claimed to have used to dismember Liu. The match was positive. It was also discovered that the newspaper pages found around the body part were the missing pages from newspapers that the police had confiscated from the house. Fiber found in the boxes matched the fibers on Leong's clothing. The tape used to wrap the cardboard boxes was also from the man's house, and the bags in which the body parts were wrapped matched those found in his son's bedroom. Additionally, the police searched the bathroom where Leong dismembered the body. At first glance, the room appeared clean and impeccable, with no stains or smell of blood. However, when Inspector Roy looked under the toilet, he discovered a small red stain. Later, medical examination confirmed that the red stain was Liu's blood. 10 days after his arrest, Leong finally broke down under immense pressure. He retracted his initial statements and told the police the entire truth. He confessed to stealing Liu's bank cards while she was showering after they had sex in a hotel room on June 13, 2005, and admitted that he used the money for purchases. He feared that Liu might recognize him on the surveillance camera recordings and thought that if he were arrested and convicted for theft, his family and acquaintances would discover the shocking truth about their affair. Leong also risked losing his job, reputation, and the respect of his family and friends. Consequently, he invited Liu to his home on the morning of June 15, 2005, and strangled her. Ironically, everything he feared and was ashamed of eventually happened, but with far greater consequences. Instead of a theft of $2,000, it turned into a monstrous crime. On May 3, 2006, nearly 11 months after his arrest, 51-year-old Leong first appeared in court charged with the murder of Liu Hongmei. At the start of the trial, the prosecution based its case on statements and confessions made by Leong during his pre-trial detention. When the accused took the stand after the prosecution had presented its case, he suddenly changed his story. He challenged the validity of his confession, claiming that Inspector Roy had gained his trust and induced him to write incriminating statements. He also alleged that the inspector treated him kindly and even offered him Chinese herbal tea to persuade him to allow the police to record his statement. Further, he claimed he was promised that these statements would help mitigate the murder charges against him. However, Inspector Roy rejected these accusations. He stated that a week after the confession about the motive for the murder, Leong mentioned feeling hot, and then Roy decided to buy 2 bottles of herbal tea. The inspector presented a notebook in which he had documented his account and proved that the herbal tea was indeed purchased after Leong's confession, contrary to his claims. Judge Tae Eng Wan then ruled that the defendant's confession was admissible as evidence. After this setback, Leong reverted to his original version of the story, claiming that Liu's death was the result of a love pact made to die together. He stated that the woman had voluntarily allowed herself to be strangled, thereby proving her sincerity and love for him. The reason Leong insisted on this version was because he wanted to be convicted of manslaughter, which could result in a maximum penalty of life imprisonment, rather than the death penalty. Regarding the claim that Liu was depressed over an impossible love affair, the police evidence about the young woman's true optimistic feelings, full of plans for the future, cast doubt on Liang's version. Later, the defendant was asked to demonstrate how he strangled Liu. He had previously claimed that he strangled her with a towel. One of Liang's lawyers, Sunil Sudhisan, volunteered to act as a dummy for the demonstration. Journalist and crime reporter Selena Lum reported in an interview that when she saw Liang demonstrate how he strangled the victim with a towel, she noticed a strange smirk on his face. This detail added an eerie aspect to the proceedings and potentially influenced the perception of Liang's testimony, hinting at a lack of remorse or possibly a manipulative tactic to minimize his culpability in the crime. According to the reporter, that smirk chilled her to the bone, and she wondered what exactly was going through Liang's mind at that moment. On May 19, 2006, after a 16-day trial, Judge Tae En Kwan delivered his verdict. He refused to downgrade the murder charge, as he did not believe Liang's claims about a love pact. The judge pointed out that Liu, whom he described as a vibrant young woman at a bright stage of her life, had no reason to desire death, as she showed no signs of despair. Instead, she had high hopes for her future up until the day she died. Judge Tae Yen Kwan noted that based on all the evidence, Liang had a motive to kill Liu, considering the potential risk of losing his family's respect, his job, and his reputation due to theft if the woman had reported him. Selfishly reasoning, the defendant decided that he needed to silence the victim forever, despite his purported feelings for her. In the end, Judge Tae Yen Kwan found 51-year-old Liang Siu Chor guilty of murder and sentenced him to death by hanging. On November 30, 2007, the execution order was issued, and Liang Siu Chor was hanged at Changi Prison at dawn. At that time, he was 52 years old. Good to know you're still here. Let's move on to another chilling story. Relationships with influential people may initially seem like a great opportunity, promising the fulfillment of cherished desires and a luxurious life. However, such relationships can also be fraught with many dangers. The case we are discussing today serves as a harsh reminder that tying your life to powerful figures can turn it into a nightmare. Today, we will delve into the horrific story of a young model and translator from Mongolia, a sordid tale that the Malaysian government is desperately trying to conceal. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's dive into this new case. Sharibugian Altantuya was born in 1978 and spent her entire childhood in St. Petersburg. In 1990, when she was 12 years old, her family decided to return to their ancestral homeland in Mongolia. Little is known about Altantuya's childhood. Her relatives described her as a diligent child who could concentrate well on her studies. Our heroine grew up to be a very sociable and active young woman. She loved lively parties and socializing with friends. At one of these events, Altantuya met a man who would later become her husband. The man's name was Madai. He was a well-known singer and performed with a musical group called Kar Sarnai. According to mutual friends, it was love at first sight. The young couple started dating in 1996 when Altantuya turned 18. The new relationship of the famous singer immediately became public knowledge and was eagerly discussed on fan pages of the band. During this period, Altantuya enrolled in university to study translation. Enrolling in November 1996, she was expelled by January 1997 for regularly skipping classes and her situation at the time. The fact was that by then, Altantuya was pregnant and unable to study fully. Journalists described Altantuya and Madai's relationship as wonderful, considering them one of the most beautiful couples on the local scene. But the real relationship between the young parents was far from ideal. From the moment the child was born, the marriage began to fall apart. Madai was often absent from home, touring with his group and performing throughout Mongolia. When Altantuya was forced to stay home around the clock caring for her son, she felt lonely and abandoned, leading to frequent quarrels about everyday matters. Eventually, the couple decided to divorce, and in 1998, after settling all legal matters, they separated. Custody of their son was granted to Altantuya. According to her friend, Altantuya always aspired to become a successful model. She loved studying fashion and keeping up with its trends. Even when taking out the trash, she would dress stylishly. Driven by her dream to become a famous model, she moved to Paris in 2000 to study at a renowned modeling agency. After completing her course and receiving a model certificate, she returned to Mongolia and started working for a large company dealing in clothing imports from China. However, after a short stint, she decided to start her own business and established a travel agency. Being multilingual made this relatively easy for her. Altantuya spoke Russian, English, Chinese, and French. In addition to her work at the travel agency, she also worked part-time as a model for a local boutique, appearing in their new collections for magazines. While mingling in fashion circles and attending themed parties as a model for a famous brand, Altantuya met a man named Kuniko. He was the son of a renowned Mongolian designer and was involved in costume design himself. Their passionate romance resulted in the birth of her second child. Unfortunately, this marriage, like her first, did not last long and ended in divorce 2 years later. As before, custody of the children was granted to the mother. While Altantuya worked, her children were raised by her parents, spending most of their time with their grandparents. Friends recalled that Altantuya was as beautiful as she was hardworking. She was a very energetic woman, always striving to get the most out of life. However, her ambitions were extinguished like a match when she got involved with a person from the Malaysian government. But how did this happen? Altantuya traveled extensively, visiting many countries, including China, Singapore, and Malaysia. Unverified sources claimed that she was involved in escort services in Hong Kong, but there is no concrete evidence to support this, apart from a few mentions. It is well documented that Altantuya attended an international diamond exhibition in Hong Kong in 2004. There, she met the then Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Tun Razak, who introduced her to Abdul Razak Baginda, a military analyst from his staff. The nature of Altantuya's relationship with Baginda remains unclear. It is known that she provided translation services for Baginda during his overseas trips, translating from Russian to English. In March 2005, Baginda, accompanied by Altantuya, embarked on a trip to Europe. This trip appeared to be more of a romantic getaway than a business trip, given the luxurious hotels and expensive restaurants they frequented. Later, Altantuya accompanied Baginda to France for government and military business directly overseen by Baginda. In 2002, the Malaysian government signed a contract with a Franco-Spanish company for the supply of 3 military-class submarines. In 2005, Baginda had to meet again with the French suppliers to discuss some details of the deal. Altantuya, fluent in French among other languages, accompanied him to these negotiations. During the meeting, both parties agreed that the Malaysian government would make an initial payment for the equipment. To facilitate the transaction, the French submarine supplier transferred a commission of 114 million euros to an intermediary company managing the purchase between France and the Malaysian government. This intermediary company belonged to Baginda. According to Altantuya, Baginda promised her 500,000 euros as a commission for her invaluable contribution and assistance in these complex negotiations. However, upon their arrival in France, the relationship between Altantuya and Baginda seemed to come to an end. Altantuya returned to her family, while her employer went back to Kuala Lumpur. Although their romantic relationship supposedly ended, some sources suggest that Altantuya was pregnant with Baginda's child at that time. Adding to her distress, Baginda refused to pay the promised commission, contrary to his assurances. The woman was left, quite literally, with nothing. Feeling cruelly deceived, she traveled to Kuala Lumpur with one of her cousins, hoping to compel her former partner to fulfill his promise. However, she faced another harsh refusal upon arrival. But Altantuya was not one to give up easily. She began showing up at Baginda's house, attempting to enter the villa and causing scenes with the security guards. She also started sending threatening messages to Baginda, promising to expose alleged evidence of corrupt deals and threatening to harm herself if he did not keep his promises. Eventually, Baginda's patience ran out, and Altantuya was arrested by the police at the gate of her former partner's residence and taken to the police station. There, she tried to file a report describing the dubious deals conducted with Baginda in France. Naturally, her report was not accepted. Altantuya demanded the promised 500,000 euros and plane tickets back to Mongolia, but she was refused on all counts. She was also warned that if she continued to tarnish the reputations of officials with her statements, she would face problems. On October 18, 2006, Baginda contacted Deputy Director of the Special Security Division, Musa Safri. This was known from intercepted conversations. The next day, around 9 p.m., two officers from this division, Azila Hadri and Sirul Ajar Umar, arrived at the entrance to Baginda's villa. Reportedly, at that time, Altantuya was loudly cursing her former partner in abusive terms near the villa's driveway. That evening, Altantuya's cousin could not reach her by phone, which caused him great concern as she was always available almost around the clock, especially in recent times, suffering from insomnia and often talking to him late at night. His anxiety was further compounded by a message he received from his sister shortly before her disappearance, in which Altantuya asked him to go to the police and name Baginda as the main suspect if she went missing or was out of contact for more than 5 hours. Fearing for his sister, the man promptly filed a missing person report with the police and sought help from the Mongolian embassy in Bangkok. He also enlisted the help of a private detective. However, all urgent measures taken to find the missing woman yielded no results. 3 weeks after Altantuya's disappearance, on November 7th, the police received a crucial lead in the case. During the interrogation, security officer Azila Hadri, one of the men who arrived at Baginda's residence to calm the agitated Altantuya, revealed the location of her body. Investigators who arrived at the coordinates were shocked by what they saw. One young officer even required medical assistance, almost losing consciousness several times. Human remains were scattered everywhere, found in a forest reserve called Subang Dam. The remains were collected and taken to a laboratory, where DNA testing confirmed they belonged to the missing Altantuya. The forensic examination concluded that her body had been blown up using C4 explosives, commonly used for military purposes. Surprisingly, the investigation progressed quickly, and soon after, Corporal Sirul Ajar Umar, the second security officer who had visited Baginda's residence on the day of Altantuya's disappearance, was arrested and thoroughly interrogated. A few days later, Abdul Razak Baginda was also detained and arrested on suspicion of involvement in organizing Altantuya's murder. A recently published secret police report on the case described the terrifying final moments of Altantuya's life. According to the interrogation statements, as soon as Altantuya realized the men were armed and serious, she began begging them to spare her and her unborn child. However, the security officers showed no mercy, forcibly pushing her into a car and driving her out of the city to the reserve. Azila then pulled her out of the car, threw her to the ground, and shot her several times with an automatic weapon. They then stripped her, placing her clothes in a plastic bag. It remains unclear why they chose such a brutal method to dispose of her body. They attached several sticks of C4 explosives to her legs, abdomen, and head, and then detonated it. The scene was reminiscent of a horror movie. Altantuya's father described the site of her murder as looking like it had been bombed, with a large crater in the ground. What happened to my daughter reminds me of a horror movie plot. I've only seen such terrible things in movies. I visited the site of Altantuya's murder. This place in the reserve looked like it had been bombed. There was a huge crater in the ground, as if from a shell impact. Try to imagine how I feel. On November 15, 2006, security officers Inspector Azila Hadri and Corporal Sirul Ajar Umar were charged with murder. The next day, Abdul Razak Baginda was also charged in the Kuala Lumpur Magistrates Court with abetting the murder. Altantuya's family was determined to seek justice and truth for her death, despite facing immense pressure and potential danger from powerful officials eager to cover up the case. The trial of the accused began on July 19, 2007. Throughout the proceedings, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Tun Razak was under close scrutiny. Investigations were conducted to determine if he had any involvement in Altantuya's murder or in the actions of his subordinate, Abdul Razak Baginda. Najib consistently denied any close acquaintance with the victim. The trial was highly intense. Among the evidence presented were photographs from the negotiation process in France, showing Prime Minister Najib, Baginda, and Altantuya as a translator, in discussions with representatives of the submarine supplier company. On October 31, 2008, Baginda was acquitted due to insufficient evidence of his guilt. "I will say again, I am not guilty. At one point I said, 'God knows I am not guilty, and I will be freed.' And it happened. I will repeat what I have said 1,000 times, Najib Razak never met the deceased." After almost 2 years of legal proceedings, the Malaysian High Court delivered its verdict. Inspector Azila Hadri and Corporal Sirul Ajar Umar were found guilty of murdering Sharibu Altantuya and sentenced to death by hanging. Both men were shocked and surprised by the verdict. They claimed they were merely following orders from higher-ups and became scapegoats to protect the true mastermind. They repeatedly stated that they did not intend to harm Altantuya and were simply obeying orders. Both convicts later filed appeals, which were reviewed much later in late June 2013. Remarkably, a new judge, upon thorough review of the cases and the investigation process, acquitted both murderers of the previously filed charges. This decision was unprecedented. Death row inmates were acquitted and released. The acquittal was based on investigative errors and inconsistencies in the prosecution's evidence that led to the conviction. After Azila and Sirul were released, prosecutors promptly filed counter-appeals against the court's decision. These appeals were reviewed 2 years later, in January 2015. After lengthy deliberations, the federal court overturned the acquittal and resentenced the officers to death. By this time, however, one of the murderers, Sirul, had fled to Australia and was not present at the hearing. Nevertheless, he did not manage to escape far. On January 20, 2015, he was detained by Australian immigration authorities. Sirul fled to Australia because the country's laws prohibit the extradition of criminals, even those who committed serious crimes, if they face the death penalty in their home country. In Sirul's case, the Malaysian court's death sentence was precisely that. The second killer, Azila Hadri, who remained in Malaysia and was rearrested, demanded a retrial and a review of his sentence. But the federal court rejected this request, definitively proving that no errors were made during the additional investigation, and that the sentence was absolutely lawful. Since December 2020, Azila has been on death row, awaiting the execution of his sentence. The murder of Altantuya caused a stir and discussions about this horrific incident in Malaysian society and attracted the attention of the French media. The main questions that concerned the public were how Baginda was connected to Altantuya's murder and what the true motive was. A detective hired by the victim's family claimed to have information proving an intimate relationship between the official and the victim during their visit to France. After the detective's statement hit the media and was picked up by journalists, he suddenly refused to comment further and later disappeared entirely. Neither his lawyer nor relatives could contact him. He vanished along with his wife and children. Many speculated that he was hiding, fearing persecution by the Malaysian authorities. Later, the detective resurfaced in the public sphere, claiming that he was forced to leave the country and agree to a deal offered by the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Allegedly, he was paid a substantial settlement amounting to several $1 million in exchange for not discussing the Altantuya murder investigation and leaving the country. Whether this arrangement actually took place is unknown, as it cannot be confirmed now. The detective tragically died of a heart attack in March 2013. Abdul Razak Baginda has always fully denied his involvement in or planning of the murder. He claimed that the victim had been blackmailing him for a long time to get money, and that he had hired the convicted officers solely for his protection from possible unexpected actions by the unstable translator. He asserted that the responsibility for the girl's death lay entirely with the special branch officers Azila and Sarul. Baginda also categorically rejected the notion that the murder was in any way related to the purchase of Malaysian submarines. Throughout the investigation of this case, certain media outlets demonstrated a strong bias, portraying the victim in a one-sided manner. Altantuya was labeled as a call girl, criticized for her pregnancy out of wedlock, and depicted as a greedy and vindictive woman seeking to profit from innocent people. It was unbearable for Altantuya's relatives to see the media tarnish the name of their deceased daughter. At some point, a letter from Altantuya to Baginda was made public. In the letter, she admitted to her impulsiveness towards him and her explosive temper. She also threatened to end her life if she was not paid the promised money from the deal. The letter made it clear that, in addition to feeling financially deceived, Altantuya was deeply hurt by being abandoned and unloved by Baginda. All she wanted was to see her beloved once more and talk to him. My daughter's children were deprived of their mother's love. She is gone and cannot return. Nothing in the world can replace a mother's love and care for her children. Nothing. Altantuya's life was taken. She was executed, and one day all those involved in this crime will be punished. The brutal murder of Altantuya remains an open wound in Malaysian society. Her eldest son, Monk Shagai, who was 12 years old at the time of the tragic events, suffered a severe psychological trauma from losing his mother. His younger brother, Altan Shagai, still struggles to fully comprehend what happened and suffers from a psychological disorder. Altantuya's father mentioned that their family never received an apology from the authorities or the murderers. Friends, what do you think? Was any high-ranking official involved in Altantuya's death, or did the special branch officers act on their own initiative? And how do you view the acceptability of the blackmail Altantuya used to obtain the promised money? Let's discuss this in the comments below the video. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, be sure to check them out. Thank you for watching. If you found this episode interesting, please like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments. Also, click the bell icon to not miss new videos. See you in the next stories.